Hi, this is Misha, and I've been asked to do some more videos on the FALs by a few of you, but unfortunately there just hasn't been a lot new to talk about. No new kits, no new imports, no new builds from DSA, and no new acquisitions from myself. It's just been kind of what it is. I still really like the FAL. Really, I was into it before the AK. It was kind of the gun to build and mess with back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So, without much new to say, kind of redoing things a bit, I decided to talk about really what are my favorite FALs, at least as a general rule. The Argentinian guns, made by F.M.A.P, sometimes just abbreviated down to F.M, which was basically a state-owned military arms factory in Rosario. It's a little lighter than that 22. And I have the 4 basic models that were imported back in the 80s, and one of them into the 90s. Here we have the basic Metric FAL, often known as the 50.00, fixed stock 21-inch standard weight barrel. We also have the heavy barrel version, often known as the 50.41 or 50.42, depending on which stock. It has a 21-inch barrel still, but it's heavy. It also, by common, has a bipod, although I left it off here. Sorry, had to save some space somehow. This was kind of the light machine gun version. Also in Argentina, these were known as the F.A.P. Next up, we have the Carbine version. I don't really know of an official FN designation, and for a long time people said these didn't even exist, but basically this is what is commonly known as a Congo. It has a fixed stock, has Paratrooper style rear sight. It has a short 18-inch barrel. So basically, yeah, just a Carbine version. A little handier, a little lighter. And finally, we have the Paratrooper version. FN made several types of this: the 50.61 with a 21-inch barrel and folding stock, the 50.63 with a about 17.4 inch, a little bit shorter barrel, and a folding stock, of course. And finally, the 50.64, which was like the 50.61 with the long 21-inch barrel, but it had an aluminum lightweight lower receiver. This one here is an Argentinian variant of the 50.63. So, this is really about the semi-autos, but just a brief little rundown. Argentina adopted the FAL in 1955, buying some from Belgium through the early 60s, and it set up licensed production at the Rosario factory, D.G.F.M, in 1960, and had its first rifles out a couple of years later. The early guns from Belgium were typical FAL M1 metric types, and by the time they were up and running, they were already on to the more modern versions, such as this here. They would be licensed producing pretty much every single variant that FN would, at least for standard, including the heavy barrel. In fact, Argentina is one of the few nations to really field the heavy barrel version, known in Belgium as the FALO, and in Argentina as the FAP, in any real numbers. Israel would also do a version, and Belgium itself would. Australia and Canada would do their L2 and C2 respectively, but really the heavy barrel FAL didn't take off. And Argentina is really about the only one to do the metric FAL outside of Belgium. It's kind of interesting. But their basic model, we can call it the Type 1 if we like, or the Mark 1, is this guy here. This is an Arms Corps import. In 1982, and getting into 1983 after the Falklands War, Argentina was looking for ways to increase cash flow and really just better international relations. So it introduced the FSL. This was a semi-auto version of the FAL. And it started to come into the USA in the 80s. The earliest importer was National Arms, but they did not bring over very many. Arms Corps would take over, and a few were even brought in by Pedro Belli, who also brought in high powers. So we had 3 importers in the 80s, and it seemed like a good time to bring over a semi-FAL. The FN guns were selling reasonably well here, but they were kind of pricey. Springfield had achieved a contract with Imbel of Brazil to bring over the SAR-48, another metric pattern, at a much lower price point, and it was selling well. So the Argentinian guns really seemed a good fit. They were priced quite similar to the Imbels, much cheaper than the FNs, yet they still were FN quality, and they were made to FN spec. In fact, F.M.A.P. was so close to FN that FN would sometimes use them as a subcontractor for parts and things when they ran out or needed them. And, they were very close in their manufacturing. And in one way, the Argentinian guns were better. FN would go to the Type 3 non-lightning cut receiver in the 70s, but still forge it for a brief time. But in 1977, 1978, they would start investment casting the receiver. Now, they did it properly, of course. So all the FN guns from the 80s were investment cast receiver guns, but they were fine. Obviously, you don't hear of them exploding. But FN themselves said that these would have a shorter service life overall compared with the forged receivers. So even they acknowledged they weren't quite as strong. Well, both F.M.A.P. in Argentina and Imbel in Brazil kept on with the forged receiver, even though they were doing the Type 3 non-lightning cut. So in that sense, I really do think the Argentinian guns are kind of nice. They still have the chrome lined barrel. They have the more matte type furniture, not the real shiny stuff like you see on Imbels and some of the Belgians. I think that's nice. The Arms Corps guns would have the tall sights. The National Arms would have the shorter sights. Not a lot of variation in these, really. They took standard mags. They could be had with or without the bipod. Now, they did have a special semi-auto civilian-only flash hider. This still works as a flash hider. It even works still as a bayonet lug, bayonet mount. But it's not internally threaded for the blank adapter. And it does not have the grenade ring. I guess they felt the blank adapter really wasn't necessary for civilians, and the grenade ring was sort of banned by the 1968 gun control thing. It's confusing. Technically, grenade launchers were banned, but some guns would still come in with grenade rings and other guns would not. Well, after Arms Corps started bringing in the 50.00 style as the FSL, they would expand the product line in the late 80s. Moving on, we have the FSP, which is the semi-automatic version of the F.A.P., the heavy barrel. It's very similar in the back, still tall sight, fixed polymer stock. It has the wood handguard with the wood enlarged carry handle for the heavy barrel. The barrel is the same length, but it's much thicker, especially as you get close to the chamber. Obviously, it's exposed here for cooling. It has a longer flash hider. Now, what's interesting, because really they did not import very many of these at all, this has the standard military flash hider that is threaded for the blank fire device, and I would assume the reason they didn't even bother changing it up was It never had a grenade ring on it, so there was nothing to worry about. Now, of course, a bipod would go here as well, but to save on space, I left it off. I keep this one stored without the bipod on because it's very, very heavy. It's a nice bipod as far as you're not going to break it, but yeah. And in military service, these would be fitted with 30-round mags instead of 20. As a light machine gun, this gun was not terribly successful. As a semi-auto, I think outside of collectors, no one really got it. It's just a bigger, heavier version of the FSL, and it didn't really do anything. It wasn't any more accurate. So I think aside from maybe cool points or just collecting, that's why you don't see many of these in the country at all. This was my most recent pickup. This is another early pre-ban arms corps, but again, they only brought them over for a very brief period of time. Has a 2-digit serial even. Here we go to next one. This is the Congo, as I said. It's basically the same gun as the standard, except we have a non-bipod cut handguard and barrel. The barrel is 18 inches as opposed to 21. This one has a standard flash hider with grenade ring, and this one I put the blank fire adapter in just because, to show you. You see it screws in there. It just unscrews out, ratchets out. Now, some of these came in with the tall sights. This one, though, has the short, so-called Type 4 or Mark 4 sights. Late in production at F.M.A.P, they would go to the short sights, and this would be the Paratrooper style with 2 flip positions. See, it's got the closed ear up here. You could also call the heavy barrel the Type 2 or Mark 2. I've seen it referred to as that. So this would be basically a 4 late style. This gun is actually out of the collection of the former owner of Arms Corps, and so it's kind of a prototype, its own thing. It's not exactly emblematic of the standard Congo style imports. However, with so few in the country, yeah, it's hard to really say much of anything. And probably the most popular to a lot of people today is the Paratrooper here. You could call this a Type 3 if you like. Kind of fits in there. We have the FN style metal folding stock with the coating on top for your cheek. It has the release latch down here. This has the later style cast lower receiver. Upper still forged though. We don't have a carry handle, instead we have an insert here. We have the earlier style Paratrooper rear sight, which is not flip adjustable. It's just drift adjustable for windage. It's a very durable sight. Sometimes it's known as the Holland. Standard handguards. Like I said, it has about a 17.4 inch barrel. Standard flash hider. Combo device. This one does have the folding cocking handle found on the FN version. I actually did a video about a year ago. Someone asked me to disassemble it, so we did a disassembly video. This too is kind of another prototype out of the Arms Corps collection. So it's a little different than maybe standard, but very interesting. So yeah, if you're looking at the mechanics of this, check out that disassembly video. So those are the Argentinians, and I just think they're kind of neat, and for a long time they were very inexpensive, at least compared to the FNs and even to some extent the MBELs. Only a few really came in pre-ban. I don't think anyone knows exact numbers, but it seems to be under 1,000 total. And of those, most all were of the standard version. The fewest seem to be of the Congo and the heavy barrel. Possibly only a few dozen of each, frankly. Because a lot of these were only getting going when the 89 ban was put into effect. So you'll find the standard version, and then next to it you'll find the Paratrooper version. There's maybe a few more of those in the Congo or the heavy. Well, the assault weapons ban, the import ban of 89, put a damper on a lot of fun stuff, unfortunately, and so we only had those few pre-ban Argentinians. However, there were a number of them caught in customs, as happened with other guns. And what happened after these were finally released from customs, they split them up. They took the barreled uppers, and DSA would grab those, and then the rest of the parts, like the lower and stuff, would go to global trades. So to get around the ban, what they would do is they wouldn't sell them as complete guns, they would sell them as barreled receivers at one factory, and then they would sell them as parts kits at another factory. These guns are pretty easy to identify. Normally the serials don't match. The serials will be over 1,000, and they will have SACLATA, SACLATA, stamped inside the magwell in this area in here in very small font. This one doesn't have it. I'm just saying it would be in this area right in here if it did. Now these guns are every bit the quality of a pre-ban, because originally they technically were, but they were caught in customs and so on and so forth. So that's one option to look into if you're looking for one. For a long time they were criminally undervalued to the point of even being cheaper than DSAs. Also, there were a number of just receivers brought in before the ban and after, and people have built these up into kits, and there have been a number of kits brought over. Up until about 2015, 2016, Sarco still had really nice mint Type 4 kits with original barrels, and these were the last hurrah that came over from Argentina. In fact, F.M.A.P. is no longer making the FAL. They're just supporting as best they can the Argentinian military who still uses them. So there are Argentine guns out there, and actually finding a receiver or one of the SACLATA guns is not that difficult. And even finding a pre-ban is still easier than... Actually, even though there are fewer pre-ban Argentinians in the country, they still go for less money than the Belgians. There's significantly more Belgian guns out there, yet they bring huge money compared to the Argentinian guns. Ditto goes for the pre-ban Imbel guns. So I really think that if you're looking for a great FAL, is a collectible or even a shooter, looking into the FMAP or the Imbel guns is really a great alternative. The Belgian guns to me have just shot crazy out of sight, and I don't know, they are what they are, but I would look to the South American guns, and some of them are very close to military and just really interesting variations. Those are just my thoughts. Like I said, unfortunately there's just not a whole lot out there on these guns. I've dug around for years looking for information, and it's just not out there, unfortunately. Well, if you like FALs, you might check out a few of our other videos, and feel free to ask questions or share your own information in the comments. Anything you know that I haven't said or I'd love to hear about. I'm always adding to my knowledge on these things as best I can. If you like, please click. And if you'd like to help support us, please click on the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and please tune in again next time for hopefully more interesting videos. We'll catch you then.